Hello and welcome and a happy new year. My name's Anne Labar and I'm the vicar of Seal Church, and I've got a story for you today. But before I tell the story, I'm going to light our candle here. Peace be with you. I'm going to tell you a story today which is associated with this time of year. In church, it's still Christmas time. You may have taken your tree down and your decorations. It may seem like a long time since you unwrapped your presents, but in church it's still Christmas. That's why if you come into Seal Church, you'll find we've still got our Christmas crib up. You can come and find it there anytime in the next few weeks, because we celebrate Christmas for 40 days after Christmas Day. And in particular, this season, this part of the Christmas season, is called Epiphanytide. And in it, we tell lots of stories and we think about them, about people who perhaps saw Jesus for the first time, or maybe realised something new about him. Epiphany is an old Greek word, and it means shining forth, like a light shining in the darkness. Something that shows things so that people can see them, that reveals things to them. So we start the Epiphany season when we hear about the wise men following the light of a star who come and they see Jesus, not at all what they were expecting or where they were expecting. But I'm going to tell you another story that's associated with Epiphany. And it's a story that comes from about 40 days after Jesus was born, a day that we celebrate as the Feast of Candlemas. And this is the story that's associated with that time. In Jesus' culture, the Jewish culture, 40 days after a child was born, their parents were supposed to bring them to the temple in Jerusalem to say thank you to God for them. And when they came, they would bring with them an offering, either a lamb, if you could afford one, but lambs were quite expensive. So if you couldn't, you could bring 2 pigeons instead. So 40 days after Jesus was born, just like every other mum and dad, Mary and Joseph brought Jesus, still a baby, to the temple. And my goodness, what a place it was, right in the heart of the capital city of Jerusalem. It was huge. Mary and Joseph had never been in a building so big. It had great high walls and splendid gates. The walls were thick. They went inside, and inside there were so many people. The temple was really a series of courtyards open to the sky, so there was no roof. And in these courtyards, people were doing all sorts of things. Some people were buying and selling the lambs and the pigeons, the things that people would give as offerings. Other people were talking to each other. There were people having little discussions about things that were really important to them. Some people were giving speeches with a little crowd gathered around them. And others were quietly praying or worshipping or thinking about God. But it wasn't like a church is now, with lots of seats and everybody being quiet and listening. Oh no, it was more like a marketplace, full of people, crowded and pushing and jostling. Mary and Joseph, when they came into the temple with baby Jesus, they looked around and of course they didn't know anyone, and nobody there knew them. They were complete strangers, and they wondered, where were they going to go first? What were they going to do? Well, they knew that they needed to give an offering, and they couldn't afford a lamb because they were too poor for that. So they bought their 2 pigeons to give as an offering, and they started to push their way through the crowd to see if they could find out where they had to go. What they didn't know was that although they thought no one knew them and they knew nobody, there were 2 people in that temple who had been watching out for this moment, waiting for them, and who, as soon as they came in, they somehow knew that these were the people that they'd been looking for. This was the child they'd been waiting for. Those two people were two very elderly people, and they were called Simeon and Anna, an old man and an old woman. Simeon was very old, and he was good, and he was kind, and all his long life he'd been looking around the world around him and thinking it was so sad that people didn't seem to be able to love each other and care for each other the way he knew God wanted them to. Simeon knew that God had promised that one day he would send a special helper, someone who would show people what he was like, who would show people what his love was like, and would help them to love each other with that same love. But when was this going to happen? For years and years Simeon had waited. A long time ago, when he was young, he had heard the voice of God speaking to him quietly in his heart, and God had promised him that he, Simeon, wouldn't die until he saw that special helper. But Simeon was starting to wonder whether that could possibly be true. He trusted in God's promises, but when would it happen? Who would it be? So day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, Simeon came to the temple to pray and to wait and to watch for that moment when God would send his helper to help and save and heal the world. And also in the temple, there was an old woman, and the old woman's name was Anna. And Anna was a widow. Her husband had died a long time ago. And she didn't just come to the temple every day. Ever since her husband had died, she lived in the temple. Night and day and night. There was Anna, like Simeon, praying and waiting and watching for that special helper God would send. And as Simeon and Anna watched and prayed and waited on that particular day, they noticed a young couple coming in through the gates, buying some pigeons, trying to push their way through the crowd with their baby held in their arms. The Bible doesn't tell us how they knew that these people, this mother and father and this child, were special. But somewhere deep in their hearts, they recognized that in this child, the light of God was shining. Simeon was the first to get up and go towards them. He pushed his way through the crowds and squeezed over to Mary and Joseph with a great big grin on his face, a smile of welcome and tears in his eyes. And he looked at the child in their arms and he said, "May I?" And he held out his arms, and Mary and Joseph could see that he was good and kind. So they put Jesus into his arms, and Simeon looked at the child as he lay in his arms, and the tears rolled down his cheeks, and he says, "This is the one. This is the one that God promised. He's here. Lord," he said, praying to God, "now I can die happy and at peace, because I know that I've seen your special helper. I've seen the one who you were sending to bring light not just to our country and our people, but to people all over the world. He'll be a light that will light up the world." And Simeon looked at Mary and Joseph and he said, "Of course it's good news, but it's going to be difficult too, because not everyone will like what this child says and does. Those who are powerful and rich will be afraid that maybe he will challenge them, that he'll see that there's injustice in the world, that they've got money that isn't theirs and they've done things that aren't right to get to that position of power. And when he challenges them, they won't like it. And so they'll want to get rid of him. And so it's going to be difficult sometimes and painful. But this child is going to be the one that lights up the world, a special child. And I am so glad to have seen him, just as God promised I would." And at that moment, Anna came up too, and she looked at the child, And she burst into a big grin and tears ran down her face. And she got really excited and she turned to all the people who had gathered around in the temple and she said, this is the child. This is the one God promised to send. This is the one we've been waiting for. And here he is to show us God's love and to show us how to love one another. And Mary and Joseph watched all this and listened, but they didn't really understand it. They never forgot it though. They took it away in their hearts and they thought about this thing that had happened, about Simeon and Anna, and they pondered it and they wondered about it and they wondered what it meant. But they knew that their child was a special child, God's Son, come to show the world God's light, to be a light that lit up everyone's lives. I wonder what you thought of that story. I wonder what it would have been like to have been in that temple amidst all the crowds with all the people and all the noise. I wonder what it was that Simeon and Anna saw in Mary and Joseph and Jesus. I wonder how they knew that this was the one. I wonder what it had been like for them to wait all those years for this moment. I wonder if you've ever had to wait for something for a long time and then maybe it's happened. I wonder what that felt like. I wonder what it's like for us now. We're all waiting for coronavirus to be over. I wonder what that feels like, to be waiting for something good to happen. Perhaps you could talk about that story with the people that you're with. See what they think. Perhaps you could find a light of your own. I've got this candle here. Maybe you could find a battery tea light or a torch, or you could light a candle if there's a grown-up with you and it's safe. Then perhaps you could turn out all the other lights and think about how special light is, and why it matters, and what's so wonderful about it, and why we need it. Anyway, that's our story for today, the story of Simeon and Anna in the temple. It's a story that we remember in the season of Epiphanytide as we continue to think about the Christmas message of God who comes to us in Jesus. And it's time now for us to blow out our candle. But of course the light of God never goes out. But still, we should blow out this candle because we've run out of time. So are you going to help? I'll count to 3 and then we'll blow. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, blow. Bye for now.